Afternoon, America. Brian James Blem here on and welcome you back to another episode of What the Fuck's Up. Today I want to talk a little bit about the controversy raging in America with respect to voter registration databases, because there is a lot of nonsensical, hypocritical language out there being used and actions taken. Right? You have the Trump administration. The federal government already prohibits anybody that's not a U.S. citizen from voting in federal elections. Meaning if you want to vote for the President of the United States, a member of the United States Senate, or a member of the United States House of Representatives, you must be a citizen of the United States to vote. And so the federal government wants to verify voting registration databases to ensure that we don't have illegal immigrants and others who are not U.S. citizens voting in federal elections. Now, the Democrats, Adrian Fontes in the state of Arizona and his sidekick, that AG woman, whatever her name is, keep telling everybody, oh no, we have to protect your voter data. We've got to protect the sanctity and privacy of your voter data. Well, that is completely, 100%, unabashedly hypocritical. And I'm going to tell you why. And the reason why is Arizona law and the Secretary of State give carte blanche access to your voter registration data to their friends. And they do it through non-governmental organizations. We've all learned more recently over the last 2-3 years how non-governmental organizations have been used by the government to disrupt our democratic processes and to skew our elections. And they're doing the same thing with respect to voter registration databases across the United States. I'm just going to use Arizona as an example here, right? What access do NGOs have to your voter registration records? Well, first of all, organizations that are approved by the Arizona Secretary of State as voter registration groups, NGOs, they're a form of NGO that does voter registration activities, are provided carte blanche access. If you read Arizona Revised Statute, Section 16-168F, when it comes to who has access to any and all of your voter registration, and it mentions these NGOs, non-governmental organizations that engage in voter registration activities, they have access to your personal data for any purpose. The statute could not be clearer, folks. Most of these NGOs that are participating in Adrian Fontes's, actually a program began by the Secretary of State at the time, the current governor of the state of Arizona, this unique URL program, right? And so let's talk about sort of these in two different lights. What access for any purpose do they have? These non-governmental organizations have access, right? This data list right here, full date of birth, driver's license number, state identity number, Indian census number, father's name, mother's maiden name, state or county of birth, your signatures, and your email. Right? All of this data shall not be accessible or reproduced by any person except, one of the exceptions includes, the non-governmental organizations for any purpose. Folks, they have carte blanche access to all of the voter registration data they need to change your voter registration without your knowledge or consent. They have all of the information they need to upload new voter registrations on your behalf. That's a crazy system, isn't it? But they don't want the federal government checking your voter registration database to ensure that the counties and the state of Arizona, or whatever state you're talking about, are complying with federal law with respect to who can vote in federal elections. That's the ultimate hypocrisy, folks. And why does that hypocrisy exist? Because most of these non-governmental organizations that access all of this data of yours, your personal data, folks, doesn't get more personal than this, can be accessed for any purpose. That's absolutely insane. And then when she was governor, Governor Hobbs created what's known as a unique URL program, whereby she gave these voter registration NGOs, these non-governmental organizations, access to upload voter registrations into the system. This unique URL program doesn't just give them access. It gives organizations approved by the left-leaning Secretary of State, then Hobbs, now Adrian Fontes, the ability to use their unique URL, the ability to distribute your unique URL. Distribute. They can distribute it to whom? Anybody they want. Or they can even post the unique URL online. Now, this system, folks, generally is a problematic system, because as you expand the nodes of people with access to your sensitive data, you increase the opportunities for nefarious actors to target and gain access to that system. That's a problem. And so we're giving these non-governmental organizations this backdoor access to the voter registration, statewide voter registration database in the state of Arizona. That's a huge problem, folks. That's something that needs to be changed, and needs to be changed soon, because the corruption, the amount of corruption available in your voter registration database is huge. Now, take a look at this video from Stephen Richer in the run-up to the 2024 election, where he talks about the last day to register to vote and what happens in at least Maricopa County and likely every other county. Here, take a listen.
That does include 90,000 voter registration forms that were dropped off on the deadline October 7th. That was the largest single day of voter registration forms in Maricopa County's history. We had people with entire trash bags full of voter registration forms in our lobby. Now, a lot of people have asked about the integrity of those voter registration forms. About 50,000 of those voter registration forms were voter registration forms that we simply wanted to process and could process and get those people prepared to be able to participate in this election. 40,000 approximately of those voter registration forms were, I think the charitable word would be to say they were needing attention. Those would be voter registration forms that were damaged, voter registration forms torn, voter registration forms written illegibly, voter registration forms that tried to register Mickey Mouse, Jerry Seinfeld, Donald Duck, among others.
All right, now let's break that down. Stephen Richer says, well, on the last day to register to vote for the 2024 general election in November, 90,000 paper voter registration forms were dumped on Maricopa County, right? He said people were hanging out in the voter registration office with trash bags. Believe it? Trash bags full of voter registration forms. Now, he said about 50,000 of those they were able to process, but 40,000 had some problem, including fraudulent efforts to register voters in the name of cartoon characters, in the name of TV personalities like Jerry Seinfeld. This is a huge problem, folks. And why is it a huge problem? Because when you get people submitting fraudulent voter registration forms to Maricopa County in the efforts to fraudulently register voters, nothing ever happens to them. Where's the county attorney? Where's the Maricopa County sheriff on this issue? That is a fraudulent act to submit a forged voter registration form to a county recorder's office in an effort to fraudulently elect a voter in the state of Arizona. But nothing ever seems to come of it. He also admitted in a later portion, a later sequence of this press briefing, whatever it was, that the same gentleman in being investigated for fraudulent voter activity, registration activities in Pennsylvania, his organization, was one of the organizations that dumped this massive paper on the Maricopa County Recorder's Office on the last day to register to vote. Right? And so are they the ones submitting these fraudulent voter registration forms? Why is nothing ever done? The reason they do this, folks, because they also have access through the unique URL program to use, distribute, and post their unique URL for uploading voter registration data into the system. Why would you dump 90,000 on one day? Boom. Stephen Richer says it overwhelms the system. The voter registration office was highly stressed. When you're highly stressed and you're making decisions, well, will I be disenfranchising a legitimate voter? You know, you have to weigh these options. And how many times do fraudulently registered voters slip through the cracks and get registered to vote? It's a problem, folks. We need to make sure we get the non-governmental organizations out of this system where they can just wholeheartedly carte blanche electronically dump stuff into the system, and where they have carte blanche access to your personal information while at the same time denying, right, legitimate officers of the federal government access to the voter registration database to ensure that only U.S. citizens are voting in federal elections. I hope this clarifies some things for you folks, because we got problems with non-governmental organizations that have been skewing democracy in the United States of America for the last 6-10 years. And we need to get things under the control so that it's you that's actually electing your elected representatives rather than some cabal of organized crime that is playing hanky with your electoral system. And with that, I say peace.